This is a story about deception, about 500 years of the entire world looking in the wrong direction, and about one man, long gone, long reduced to legend, who hid something in plain sight that academics are still arguing about today. You know the Mona Lisa. You think you know the Mona Lisa. The smile, the mysterious gaze, the most famous painting in history. That is all a facade. That is exactly what you were meant to focus on. Because while everyone spent 500 years staring at the face, nobody looked at what was behind her. And behind her is a map, a real one, geographically precise, with a real bridge, a real river, a real location that exists right now, and that holds a secret some researchers are willing to stake their entire careers on. What did Leonardo hide in the landscape behind the Mona Lisa? Why did an Italian art historian, after pulling archives from the vaults of Florence, go pale at what he found? What stands on the other side of that ancient bridge? A church with no recorded history, or a hill that seems not to exist? And why are official sources completely silent about all of this? Watch until the end, because halfway through this video you will open a map, literally. And after that, you will never be able to look at the Mona Lisa the way you looked at it before. Look at her carefully. Not the way the crowd looks at her in the Louvre, over each other's shoulders, through phone screens, through bulletproof glass. Look at her the way someone would who sees her for the very first time and actually wants to understand what they are looking at. The woman in the painting is dressed in dark colors. No jewelry, no ornaments. Not a single strand of pearls, no rings, no brooch. By the standards of Italian nobility at the start of the 16th century, this is almost a provocation. Wealthy Florentine women of that era adorned themselves with conspicuous generosity. This woman does not. Her garment is closed, austere, nearly monastic. Dark green with brown, the colors of humility, not celebration. Her hair is hidden, a barely visible dark veil almost merging with the background. Not the hat of a socialite, but something considerably more severe. This is a detail most viewers simply never notice because they are looking at the face. And the face, for that matter, also says a great deal. No cosmetics, no rouge, no kohl around the eyes, no defined lips. In an era when makeup was standard practice for women of her social standing, a bare face without a single stroke of color is not simplicity. It is a statement. This refers to the social norms of the period. Florentine aristocracy in the early 16th century used physical appearance as a direct instrument of status display. The absence of jewelry and cosmetics in this portrait is a deliberate artistic decision, not an oversight. The hands. They deserve a separate look. The right hand rests over the left, calmly, without tension, almost pointedly. In Renaissance iconography, this gesture had a clear reading: fidelity, chastity, piety. This was how you depicted a woman you wanted to present as virtuous. Not passionate, not alluring, virtuous. And here lies the first paradox of the painting. The smile reads as enigmatic, almost sensual, while everything else says precisely the opposite. Now, the essential point. If you remove the woman from this painting mentally, what remains? The landscape remains. And this is where things become genuinely interesting, because that landscape is not the product of an artist's imagination, not a decorative backdrop for a handsome portrait. It is painted with such topographical precision, with such careful attention to terrain and waterlines, that one uncomfortable question arises. Why? Why would Leonardo da Vinci, a man who was simultaneously a painter, an anatomist, an engineer, a cartographer, and a military advisor to Cesare Borgia, why would he place behind a modestly dressed woman in dark robes a landscape of such precise geographical accuracy? Coincidence? Leonardo did nothing by coincidence. Anyone who has seriously studied his work knows this without argument. This refers to Leonardo's professional background. Between 1502 and 1503, he served as military engineer to Cesare Borgia and personally produced detailed maps of central Italy, precisely the region depicted in the background of the Mona Lisa. Behind the woman, mountains fading into atmospheric haze, a river winding between hills, a road barely suggested in the terrain, and to the right, a bridge. 4 arches over the water. A bridge that is clearly not accidental, that clearly exists somewhere, that clearly leads somewhere specific. Leonardo did not place it in the painting as architectural decoration. He placed it as a landmark, as a point on a map. The woman in the foreground is dark, almost dissolving into the background. The landscape behind her is luminous, airy, meticulously rendered. Which of the two is actually the subject? That question no longer feels rhetorical. For 500 years, art historians have argued about the woman, about her identity, about her smile, about who she is and why she looks the way she looks. 500 years and not a single definitive answer. But while everyone was staring at the face, nobody took the trouble to look properly at what is behind her. And behind her is an entire world, a specific, recognizable, geographically precise world. Behind the Mona Lisa, there is no decoration, no fantasy, no abstractly romantic Renaissance landscape painted for atmosphere. There are mountains with a clearly defined relief. There is a river with specific bends that cannot be invented. They can only be copied from nature or from a map. There are hills arranged in a particular order, and there is a bridge, a 4-arched bridge over the river, rendered with such architectural specificity that it could have been entered into an engineering registry. This is not background, this is evidence. Leonardo da Vinci was not a painter in the ordinary sense of the word. He was a man who thought in systems. Anatomy, hydraulics, fortification, optics, mechanics, none of these were leisure pursuits. They were instruments of a single method, precise observation and precise recording of reality. When such a man paints a landscape, he does not invent, he documents. The only question is what, exactly, he was documenting. This refers to Leonardo's working method. Surviving manuscripts and sketches from his notebooks show that the artist never depicted nature from memory or imagination. He worked from field studies and geodetic data that he collected personally during his years of travel across central Italy. Look at the river. In the painting, it winds in a specific way, not picturesquely and smoothly as other Renaissance masters would have painted it, but with specific turns, a specific channel width at different points, a specific shoreline. This is the Arno, not just any river, the Arno itself at a specific stretch of its course in the area of the province of Arezzo. Hydrographic specialists who have compared the painting with topographic data confirm this without reservation. Look at the mountains. They are painted in the sfumato technique, Leonardo's famous blurring of edges, simulating aerial perspective. But through the haze, a clear silhouette is visible, and that silhouette corresponds to the actual relief of the upper Arno Valley, the very valley that Leonardo traversed extensively during his years as military engineer to Cesare Borgia. And now, the bridge. This is where the real conversation begins. The bridge in the painting is positioned to the right of the woman's figure, slightly below the horizon line. It is not large, but it is painted with startling architectural specificity. 4 arches, stone masonry, piers standing directly in the water, proportions that correspond to a real engineering structure, not a decorative element of the composition. Leonardo, a man who personally designed bridges and canals, depicted this bridge exactly as one depicts an object that genuinely exists. This refers to Leonardo's engineering work. His manuscripts contain hand-drawn plans of bridges and hydraulic structures for the Arno Valley, including a project to redirect the course of the river that he developed on commission from the Florentine Republic in 1503. What place is this? That question stopped being rhetorical the moment Italian art historian Silvano Vinceti picked up archival documents from the State Archive of Florence and began comparing them with what is depicted in the painting. The result of that comparison overturned the conventional view of the Mona Lisa entirely. The bridge in the painting, it turned out, is not a fiction. It exists. It existed at the beginning of the 16th century. And it stands, or rather stood, at a very specific point on the map of Italy. The Mona Lisa is smiling, and now that smile begins to read differently. Not as a mystery of temperament, not as a play of light and shadow, but as the knowing smirk of someone who is fully aware that behind her back, something has been hidden for 500 years that nobody noticed. Silvano Vinceti is not a conspiracy theorist, not a blogger, not the author of sensational books sold at airport kiosks. He is a professional Italian art historian and investigative journalist who approaches archival work the way forensic experts approach evidence, methodically, with documents in hand, with no allowance for speculation. He was the first to advance and prove, not suggest but prove, that the bridge in the background of the Mona Lisa is a real architectural structure that existed in the early 16th century and can be precisely identified. Vinceti worked with the holdings of the State Archive of Florence. This is not a municipal library. It is one of the largest historical archives in Europe, housing documents that date back to the medieval period. Notarial acts, cadastral records, road registers, engineering inventories. It was in these dusty volumes that Vinceti found what he was looking for: documentary confirmation of the existence of a four-arched stone bridge over the Arno River near Laterina, in the province of Arezzo, in the Tuscan countryside that the average tourist never reaches. This refers to the geography of the investigation. Laterina is a small municipality in the province of Arezzo, roughly 40 kilometers to the southeast of Florence. It was here, over the Arno, that the Ponte Romito stood, a monument of Etruscan Roman engineering tradition, later rebuilt during the medieval period and actively used during the Renaissance as part of the road connecting Arezzo, Fiesole, and Florence. Vinceti's method deserves separate attention. He did not simply find a mention of the bridge in the archive and declare the problem solved. He conducted a virtual reconstruction. Based on archival drawings, notarial descriptions, and surviving fragments of masonry, he rebuilt the appearance of the bridge as it would have looked in the early 16th century. He then overlaid this reconstruction onto the image in the painting. The match was precise. Number of arches, 4. Proportions of the spans. Character of the piers. The angle at which the bridge crosses the river channel. All of it matched what Leonardo depicted to the right of the woman's figure. But Vinceti went further. He compared not only the bridge, he compared the entire landscape. The morphological characteristics of the Arno River near Laterina, the width of the channel, the character of the banks, the direction of the current, the shape of the floodplain, were compared with what is shown in the painting. The hydrographic analysis confirmed this is the same stretch of river, not similar, not reminiscent, the same one. This refers to the scientific method applied in the research. Hydrographic and topographic analysis, as applied to works of painting, is a relatively new discipline, formed at the intersection of art history, geodesy, and digital cartography. This method has established that a number of background landscapes in Leonardo and his contemporaries correspond to real locations in central Italy, with a margin of error of no more than a few hundred meters. Now, the archival discovery that tied everything together. In the holdings of the same archive, Vinceti found documents confirming the regular presence of Leonardo da Vinci in the vicinity of Fiesole, a small hilltop town to the northeast of Florence, from which the Arno Valley is clearly visible. These documents record Leonardo's visits to his uncle, a clergyman named Amadori, who served in the local church. The artist came there regularly. He knew these places. He walked these roads.
He saw this bridge
from the very vantage point from which he painted it. Documents of the Medici family add another layer of precision. They confirm that the Ponte Romito was actively used from at least 1501 through 1503, precisely the period during which Leonardo was working on the Mona Lisa. The bridge was part of the bypass road connecting several major cities in the region. Merchants, soldiers, priests, and officials crossed it. Leonardo himself, in all probability, crossed it too. Today, the Ponte Romito stands in semi-ruin. The four arches that 500 years ago carried the commercial traffic of an entire region are today slowly settling into the riverbank. Local authorities in Laterina speak of restoration, and they have, it must be said, a compelling argument for funding. If this bridge is genuinely depicted in the most famous painting in the history of humanity, the tourist potential of the site is difficult to overestimate. But while the restoration funds remain unfound, the bridge continues to deteriorate, quietly and without much attention. Much the way for 500 years, the idea that the Mona Lisa's landscape is merely decorative background continued to go unchallenged. Vinceti also points to another documentary source, the Códice Hammer, also known as the Codex Leicester. This is a Leonardo manuscript created between 1506 and 1510, containing, among other things, sketches of the rocky landscape in the upper Arno Valley. Researchers have established that this very view formed the basis for the left portion of the Mona Lisa's background. The codex passed through various hands over the centuries, was purchased by Bill Gates at Christie's auction in 1994 for $30,800,000, and today ranks among the most expensive manuscripts in the world. In it, literally, is drawn the very landscape that stands behind the most enigmatic woman in the history of painting.
Coincidence?
Leonardo did nothing by coincidence. That much we have already established. A bridge is not decoration. A bridge is a question. Every bridge, in every era, in every part of the world, asks the same question. Where to? From where and to where? Across what and for what purpose? A bridge without a road is nonsense. A bridge without a destination is architectural absurdity. Leonardo da Vinci, a man who never depicted anything without meaning, painted this bridge into the picture not because it looked attractive over the river. He painted it because the bridge leads somewhere, and that is exactly where we need to go. The Ponte Romito di Laterina is not simply an old bridge over the Arno. It is a monument of engineering culture rooted in the Etruscan and Roman tradition of construction. 4 stone arches thrown between 2 natural rock faces above the river. Not a decorative structure, a functional one, designed for heavy traffic. This was the point where the road crossed from one bank to the other. Here was the only convenient crossing for many kilometers in either direction. Without this bridge, the trade and military route between Arezzo, Fiesole, and Florence would have been severed. This refers to the strategic significance of the crossing. In the Renaissance era, control over bridges across major rivers carried no less military and economic weight than control over city gates. He who held the bridge held the road. He who held the road held trade, supply lines, and the movement of armies. The Ponte Romito connected 3 key cities of the Tuscan region and was, in effect, a nodal point of the entire transport network of central Italy at that time. Documents of the Medici family record that the bridge was in active use from at least 1501 through 1503. This is not a trivial archival detail, it is a direct temporal reference. These were precisely the years during which Leonardo was working on the Mona Lisa. These were precisely the years during which he was traveling through central Italy on assignment for Cesare Borgia, drawing military maps, inspecting fortifications, and studying terrain.
He passed over this bridge.
He looked at it from the bank. He recorded it in his notebooks, just as he recorded the wings of birds, the muscles of horses, and the movement of rivers. Now, the detective logic. If the bridge is real, and we have established that it is, then it really leads somewhere. If the painting is a map, and an increasing body of evidence points precisely in this direction, then the key to the mystery lies where this bridge points. One must mentally stand before the painting and walk across this bridge, cross from one bank to the other, and look at what is there. But here arises the first difficulty that most researchers neglect to mention. The painting is not oriented the way we are accustomed to reading maps. The modern person is conditioned to expect north at the top and south at the bottom. But in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, maps were frequently oriented differently: south at the top, east on the left. This is precisely how the Mona Lisa is oriented as a geographical document. The large body of water visible behind the woman in the upper portion of the painting is not an invented lake. It is a real body of water that exists in the same locality. It lies to the south of the bridge, and in the painting it is positioned at the top. This means south faces upward in the painting. The map is inverted relative to our habitual perception. This body of water is called the Invaso della Penna. It exists today and can be found on any satellite image. Between it and the Ponte Romito lies a specific distance, a specific relief, a specific road. And it is precisely between these 2 points in the painting that the Mona Lisa sits. She is literally placed at the center of this geography, not in front of the landscape, inside it, like a marker on a map. This refers to the cartographic tradition of the era. Southward orientation of maps was characteristic of the Arab geographical school, which exercised considerable influence on Italian cartography during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Leonardo was familiar with the works of Arab geographers. His library, partially reconstructed from archival inventories, contained translations of Arabic scientific texts. Now stand mentally before the painting. The bridge is to the right. The lake is in the upper portion. The woman is at the center. If one mentally crosses the bridge and continues in the direction it leads, one arrives at a specific location on the map of modern Italy. This location is a small settlement to the west of the bridge, at the very point where the road crossing the river continues inland. On modern maps, this place is marked. It has a name, and that name is, in itself, a separate story to which we will return. For now, the fact: the Ponte Romito was, in its time, not merely a river crossing. It was a gateway. He who crossed it entered a road leading deep into the Tuscan hill country, toward a place where, at the beginning of the 16th century, there stood churches, monasteries, fortified estates, and possibly something that Leonardo considered worth encoding into the most famous painting in the world. Not for his contemporaries, for those attentive enough to look, for those who would not stop at the smile. Take any medieval map, not a modern one, a medieval one. Open Ptolemy's Atlas, Arabic geographical manuscripts, Italian portolans from the 13th through the 15th centuries, and you will immediately encounter something that disorients any unprepared viewer. South is at the top, east is on the left. Everything is inverted relative to what we are accustomed to. This is not a cartographer's error, it is a system. A different system of coordinates whose logic was completely natural to an educated person of the Renaissance, and completely unfamiliar to us. Leonardo da Vinci worked with maps throughout his professional life. He made them himself. He studied the Arab geographical tradition. He read Ptolemy in Latin translations that circulated among educated Florentines of the 15th century as readily as textbooks circulate today. When Leonardo constructed a landscape composition, he thought like a cartographer, and a cartographer of his era placed south at the top as a matter of course. This refers to the history of cartography. Southward orientation was standard in the Arab geographical school, which reached its peak between the 9th and 12th centuries. The works of al-Idrisi, al-Masudi, and Ibn Hawqal were translated into Latin and used extensively in Italian Renaissance universities. Florence, the largest intellectual center of Italy at that time, had direct access to these texts through the Medici libraries. Now look at the painting with this knowledge in mind. Behind the Mona Lisa, in the upper portion of the canvas, there is a large body of water. It is not rendered in fine detail. It is more suggested than defined, a luminous shape between the mountains. But it is there. It exists as a geographical fact of the landscape. And when researchers began looking for this body of water on a real map of the region, accounting for the inversion, accounting for south being at the top, they found it, without particular difficulty, because it exists. Its name is the Invaso della Penna. It is a reservoir situated to the south of the Ponte Romito, within the same system of the upper Arno Valley. Today, it can be located on satellite imagery within seconds. Open any mapping application and search for the Laterina Arezzo district. The reservoir is there. The bridge is there. The terrain is there. Everything in its place, exactly as Leonardo painted it, simply rotated 180 degrees relative to our habitual perspective. This refers to modern verification, satellite imagery from Google Earth, and topographic data from the Italian National Geodetic Institute now allow researchers to compare the Mona Lisa landscape with the actual terrain at a level of precision unavailable to scholars of previous centuries. This comparison confirmed the correspondence of the reservoir's shoreline, the mountain relief, and the position of the bridge relative to the water features. Now, the simplest and most compelling experiment that any person with an internet connection can conduct. Open Google Maps, find the Laterina district, province of Arezzo, Tuscany, Italy. Switch to satellite view. Find the Arno River. Find the remains of the Ponte Romito. They are there, 4 semi-ruined arches above the river, visible from above. Then find the reservoir to the south, the Invaso della Penna. And now rotate your phone screen 180 degrees. And look at what you have in front of you. You will see the Mona Lisa. Not metaphorically, not approximately. The same mountain silhouette on the left. The same river with the same bends. The same bridge on the right. The same body of water in the upper portion. The only difference is this: in the painting, between the bridge and the reservoir, sits a woman. In the satellite image, there is empty space. Space that Leonardo chose to fill with a figure. Not an arbitrary figure, a specific one, with specific symbols encoded in her posture, her clothing, the position of her hands. A woman who knows what lies behind her and smiles precisely because of it. Between the bridge and the reservoir, there is a specific distance, specific terrain, specific roads that led there in the early 16th century and that partially survive today. The Mona Lisa is placed at the center of this space, not by accident. She sits precisely where a map should carry a marker, a point, an X, the location that needs to be found. This refers to Renaissance iconographic tradition. In the cartography of the period, human figures were frequently used as markers on maps to indicate cities, shrines, and significant geographical features. Leonardo was familiar with this tradition and employed its elements in his illustrated manuscripts, where the human figure regularly served as a spatial or scale reference. So we have the bridge, we have the reservoir, we have an inverted map that, when correctly oriented, matches precisely the actual terrain of the upper Arno Valley. We have a woman seated at the center of that map, exactly between the two anchor points of the landscape.
We have an artist who was simultaneously a cartographer, an engineer, and a man capable of keeping secrets that went undetected for 500 years. And we have a question that remains unanswered. What exactly lies at the location to which this bridge points? What is there that required encoding in the most famous painting in the history of humanity? The answer lies on the other side of the bridge, and we are almost there. Cross the bridge, mentally, but precisely. Stand on the other bank of the Arno and look at where the road leads. It does not end at the water. It continues into the rolling Tuscan landscape, toward the settlements, churches, estates, and everything that made up the daily life of the region in the early 16th century. The road leads to a specific place. That place has a name, and that name is the first thing that stops anyone who reaches it through a satellite map. Casanova. On the modern map, at the very location to which the Ponte Romito points, there is a small settlement called Casanova. Not a village in the ordinary sense, more of a hamlet, a handful of structures on a hill surrounded by forest. But the name is there. And it immediately catches the attention because in the cultural memory of any European, this word is permanently associated with one image. Giacomo Casanova, the Venetian adventurer of the 18th century, the greatest seducer in the history of European literature, and quite possibly of history altogether. But here it is essential to stop and avoid the trap of association. Giacomo Casanova was born in 1725. Leonardo da Vinci was painting the Mona Lisa roughly between 1503 and 1519. Between these two dates lies more than 200 years. Leonardo could not physically have known of Casanova the adventurer. He could not have encoded into the painting a reference to a man who did not yet exist in the world. This is simply impossible. This refers to the etymology of the place name. The word Casanova in Italian toponymy has an entirely prosaic origin. Casa Nuova, new house. This is one of the most common place names in Italy, the equivalent of the English Newtown or Newton. Such names were given to settlements founded on new ground or rebuilt after destruction. There are hundreds of settlements with the Casanova route across the map of Italy, from Piedmont to Sicily. So, Leonardo, placing the figure of the woman precisely above this location on his encoded map, had no adventurer in mind and no romantic exploits whatsoever. Casanova on the map is simply a new house, a new settlement, possibly a settlement that arose on the site of older structures, possibly on the site of something that was destroyed or concealed. And this is precisely where things become genuinely interesting. Near Casanova there is a church, an old one, so old that finding detailed information about it in open sources is nearly impossible. This in itself already says something. In Italy, where every village chapel has its own entry in local historical publications, the absence of information is an anomaly, not a norm. The church exists, it stands on the map, it is visible on satellite imagery, but it is silent. This refers to the chronological coincidence. According to archival data, a church parish in the Casanova district existed from at least the 14th century. In the early 16th century, that is, precisely when Leonardo was working on the Mona Lisa, active religious life in this district is recorded in connection with the Dominican order. In the Renaissance, the Dominicans were not merely monks, they were keepers of libraries, archives, and relics. Everything that might have reason to be concealed. And nearby, a hill. Not the ordinary Tuscan hill covered in vineyards or olive groves. A strange hill, bare with a flat summit stripped of vegetation, even though the forest surrounding it is dense and unbroken. This kind of terrain in Tuscany does not arise by itself. A flat, bare summit on a forested hill is, as a rule, the trace of human activity. Demolished structures, a leveled platform, foundations that have sunk into the earth. In central Italy, hills of this kind frequently conceal the remains of Etruscan, Roman, or early medieval constructions, fortified settlements, watchtowers, sacred sites. There is nothing about this hill on the internet, not a single article, not a single local historical reference, not a single archaeological note. The hill exists. It is visible on satellite imagery, but it seems to have been struck from every registry. For Tuscany, where every stone is described and entered into the cultural cadastre, this is more than strange. It is an invitation to ask questions. So on the other side of the Ponte Romito, in the place called Casanova, there are two objects that deserve attention: a church without a history, and a hill without a name. Leonardo da Vinci, a man who encoded a real map of a real location into a painting, who placed a woman precisely above this spot, who smiles as though she knows the answer. Leonardo was looking at exactly this place, not at the woman, at what lies behind her, and specifically at what stands on the other side of the four-arched bridge over the Arno. Two candidates, the church or the hill, or, which cannot be excluded, both are connected to each other. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, churches were frequently built on the sites of older sacred structures, deliberately covering them with a sacred building of the new religion. The hill may have been the foundation, the church the superstructure, and the fact that both of them stand in the place to which the bridge in the most famous painting in the world is pointing, this is no longer coincidence. This is a system. The Mona Lisa is smiling, and now it is becoming clear why. There is a document that everyone has heard of and almost nobody has read. Not because it is classified, not because it is inaccessible, but because it is written in mirror script, in the Italian of the 15th century, and contains 72 pages of dense text interspersed with drawings, diagrams, calculations, and observations that take even a specialist months to fully process. This is the Códice Hammer, a manuscript by Leonardo da Vinci, created between 1506 and 1510. Precisely when the Mona Lisa had been completed or was in its final stages, precisely when everything Leonardo had seen and thought about the Arno Valley was still fresh in his memory. Silvano Vinceti did not turn to this manuscript by accident. He was looking for confirmation that Leonardo did not simply know the Upper Arno district from hearsay or from other people's maps, but knew it personally, as someone who had been there, who had looked at this landscape with his own eyes, who had recorded it in his own notes. And he found that confirmation. In the Códice Hammer, among entries on the movement of water, the nature of waves, and the causes of rock formation. Amid all of this encyclopedic flow, there are sketches, specific topographic sketches of the rocky landscape in the Upper Arno Valley. Researchers who compared these sketches with the left portion of the Mona Lisa's background established that this is the same location, the same form of rocky outcrops, the same character of terrain, the same horizon. Leonardo did not invent the landscape for the painting. He reproduced what he had sketched in the field, what he had seen with his own eyes. This refers to the dating. The Códice Hammer was created between 1506 and 1510, after the main work on the Mona Lisa had already been completed. This means the Arno Valley occupied Leonardo's thoughts for at least 7 or 8 consecutive years. Not as an incidental landscape, not as a single impression, as an object of systematic observation and recording. Now, the uncle. This man is almost never mentioned in popular biographies of Leonardo, although archival documents record his presence in the artist's life with reasonable clarity. Leonardo's uncle, a clergyman named Amadori, served in a church in Fiesole. Fiesole is a small hilltop town to the northeast of Florence, from which one of the finest views of the Arno Valley in the region can be seen. Leonardo visited his uncle regularly. This is confirmed by documents that Vinceti discovered in the same Florentine archive.
What do these visits mean from the perspective of our investigation? A great deal. Fiesole stands in direct line of sight to the very stretch of the Arno Valley where the Ponte Romito stands. From the hills of Fiesole on a clear day, the bridge itself is visible, as are the Invaso della Penna and the hills around Casanova. Leonardo came there not once or twice, he came regularly, over a period of years.
He looked at this landscape again and again, and all the while he was painting a picture whose background reproduces this landscape with cartographic precision. This refers to the method of visual recording. Leonardo's notebooks contain thousands of sketches made directly from life. He never drew from memory anything he considered important to record accurately. The presence of topographic sketches of the Arno Valley in the Códice Hammer means that he made field drawings on location. That is, he was physically present in this area between 1506 and 1510. Now, the Codex itself. The Códice Hammer received its current name after American businessman Armand Hammer, who purchased the manuscript in 1970. Before that it was known as the Codex Leicester, named after the English aristocrat who acquired it in the early 18th century. In 1994, the manuscript was put to auction at Christie's. It was purchased by Bill Gates for $30,800,000. This was one of the most expensive manuscripts ever sold at open auction. Today, the Codex is held in Gates's collection and is periodically exhibited in museums around the world. 72 pages, $30,800,000. And among those pages, sketches of the very landscape that stands behind the Mona Lisa. Coincidence? No, a system. The same system that Leonardo built methodically and consistently, through the painting, through the notebooks, through topographic sketches, through personal knowledge of the terrain accumulated over years. The connection of the uncle clergyman to the Fiesole district adds one more link to this system. A priest who regularly received his artist nephew. A parish situated in direct sight of the location encoded in the most famous painting in the world. A church in Casanova about which almost nothing is recorded, but which existed at precisely the right time. The Dominican order, keeper of archives and relics. A nameless hill. A bridge that connects all of it. Leonardo was not a man of accidental coincidences. He was a man of systems. And the system he built around the Mona Lisa, through the landscape, through the codex, through the personal geography of his own life, points to a single location. On the other side of the four-arched bridge over the Arno, to the place called Casanova, to a church without history and a hill without a name, toward what the woman is smiling at, toward what Leonardo considered too important to say out loud. The church in Casanova has no Wikipedia page. It has no tourist listing. No official parish website. Not even a local history note in the Arezzo archive accessible through open search. In an era when every wayside chapel and every forgotten bell tower in the Italian countryside has been entered into databases, the absence of information about this church is itself information. And that information says one thing: something here is not right. Start with what is known for certain. The church exists physically. It is visible on satellite imagery of the Casanova district in the province of Arezzo. It is a stone structure on elevated ground with a silhouette characteristic of Tuscan rural architecture. Nearby, traces of older constructions, readable in the terrain as leveled platforms and overgrown foundation outlines. By every visual indicator, this is not a structure from the 18th or 19th century. This is a building of considerably earlier origin, rebuilt or consolidated at some point in its history. This refers to the chronology. Church parishes in the district between Laterina and Arezzo are recorded in documents from the 13th and 14th centuries onward. This region fell within the sphere of influence of the Diocese of Arezzo, one of the oldest in Tuscany,
established in the early Christian period. Parish churches here were built, rebuilt, and reconsecrated over the centuries, frequently absorbing the remains of earlier sacred sites. Now, what makes this church particularly interesting in the context of our investigation? Indirect evidence connects the parish in the Casanova district with the Dominican order during the late medieval and early Renaissance period. This is not a trivial detail. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the Dominicans were not simply a monastic order. They were the intellectual elite of the Catholic Church, theologians, inquisitors, but also librarians, archivists, and keepers of manuscripts. Monasteries and churches under Dominican administration frequently held collections of documents and objects that were not intended for general circulation. Florence in Leonardo's era was saturated with Dominican influence. The Basilica of Santa Maria Novella, the principal Dominican church of the city, stood a few minutes' walk from the workshop of Verrocchio, where Leonardo spent his years of apprenticeship. Savonarola, a Dominican friar, was one of the central figures in Florentine political life in the 1490s. The connections between Dominican parishes of the region and the intellectual circles of Florence were not abstract. They were living, working, daily connections. This refers to the role of the Dominicans in preserving knowledge. The order founded the first public libraries in several Italian cities, including the Florentine Library of San Marco, the very one that Cosimo de' Medici opened to educated citizens in 1444. It was precisely Dominican monasteries in this period that served as repositories for manuscripts, relics, and objects withdrawn from public circulation for one reason or another. Leonardo's uncle, the clergyman Amadori from Fiesole, served in a region directly connected to this network of parishes. Fiesole and Casanova are separated by a distance that in the early 16th century could be covered in a few hours on horseback. If Amadori had connections to the Casanova parish, which is entirely plausible within the regional church network, then Leonardo had access to information about this place through the most reliable channel possible: familial, personal, informal. The very channel through which, in the Renaissance, knowledge was passed that one did not trust to paper. Now, the architectural aspect. In that part of Tuscany that concerns us, rural churches of the 14th and 15th centuries were built to several consistent types. A simple single-nave volume of local stone, an apse to the east, a campanile, a bell tower, either integrated or freestanding, a facade generally free of sculptural decoration, but with a portal whose archivolt might carry heraldic or symbolic elements. Precisely this type of structure is visible on satellite imagery in the Casanova district. A characteristic feature of such churches is underground structure: crypts, cellars, sealed passageways. In Tuscany, where construction has been continuous since the Etruscan period, virtually any building from the 14th or 15th century stands on earlier foundations. Beneath the church floor, one frequently finds the remains of Roman or Etruscan structures, sometimes early Christian burials, sometimes what was deliberately sealed and forgotten. It was precisely into such spaces that monastic orders placed whatever required storage without public knowledge. This refers to the practice of concealing valuables. In periods of political instability, and Tuscany in the early 16th century was precisely such a period, when Florence passed back and forth between Republican government and the Medici, when French and Spanish armies periodically moved through the region, churches were regularly used to conceal documents, relics, and valuable objects. This was not conspiracy theory. It was the ordinary practice of institutional survival in wartime conditions. Why is there no information about this church? Possibly because it was never a significant architectural or tourist destination. Possibly because the parish was dissolved during the Napoleonic reforms of the early 19th century, when hundreds of small Italian parishes were liquidated and their documentation scattered across archives or simply destroyed. Possibly, and this is the most interesting variant, because what this church holds, or held, has always required a certain degree of oblivion. Leonardo da Vinci knew about this place. This is no longer a hypothesis. It follows from the cumulative weight of documentary evidence, personal visits to the region, topographic sketches in the Códice Hammer, the connection through his uncle the clergyman, the cartographically precise landscape in the Mona Lisa. He knew. He saw. And he encoded it in the painting so effectively that for 500 years nobody paid attention, because everyone was looking at the smile. The church in Casanova is silent, but silence is also an answer. You simply need to know how to read it. The church is silent, but next to it stands something that is silent even more loudly. The hill. Not that Tuscan hill with its terraced vineyards, its olive trees across the slopes, its small farmhouse on the summit. That familiar, almost postcard Tuscan landscape sold on magnets in Florentine souvenir shops. A different hill, a strange one, bare, with a flat summit stripped of any vegetation, while the slopes and all the surrounding land are covered in dense, unbroken, clearly long, uncut forest. The forest approaches the hill from every direction and stops, as though something prevents it from going higher, as though the soil at the summit is different. In Tuscany, hills like this do not arise by themselves. Nature here does not produce flat, bare summits in the middle of dense forest. This is not characteristic of the region's geology, its climate, or the typical vegetation of the central Italian Apennine foothills. A flat, bare summit on a hill is a trace of human hands, of human activity, conducted here long enough and intensively enough to alter the character of the soil and vegetation cover permanently, or nearly permanently. This refers to the geomorphology of anthropogenic origin. In central Italy, flat hilltops with disrupted vegetation cover frequently indicate the presence beneath the surface of layers of construction debris, burnt earth, or compacted foundation beds that prevent the normal development of tree and shrub root systems. This is precisely how hundreds of unregistered archaeological sites in Tuscany appear from the air, sites not yet opened by expeditions. In Italian archives, regional, provincial, ecclesiastical, there is nothing about this hill. Not a single entry, not a single survey, not a single reference in cadastral documents under any meaningful place name. For Tuscany, where every square kilometre of territory has been described, documented, and entered into the cultural register from the Roman period to the present day, this is not merely strange. It is an anomaly that requires explanation. The shape of the hill tells a great deal to anyone who knows how to look. A flat summit is either a demolished fortification, a leveled construction platform, or both at once. In the Etruscan tradition, such platforms were used for temples and sanctuaries. The acropolises of small Etruscan settlements looked exactly like this. A flat hilltop, reinforced slopes, a single road to the top. Later in the Roman period, Etruscan acropolises were frequently rebuilt as Roman forums or military camps. In the early Christian and medieval period, as churches and monasteries, each successive layer covered the previous one, and what lay at the foundation was buried under centuries of new history. This refers to the stratigraphy of central Italian settlements. Archaeological excavations in the province of Arezzo regularly uncover multi-layered sites where Etruscan, Roman, early Christian, and medieval structures are literally stacked upon one another. Laterina and its surroundings fall within a zone that archaeologists consider promising, precisely for this reason. The density of cultural layers here is significantly above the regional average. The size of the hill does not astonish. It is not a mountain or a citadel, but it is large enough to have accommodated, on its flat summit, a small fortified settlement, a trading post, a monastic courtyard, or a storehouse. Large enough for its depth to contain underground chambers, cisterns, cellars,
crypts, tunnels. In a region where underground Etruscan tombs appear literally beneath every field, the assumption of underground structures beneath this hill is not fantasy but statistical probability. Now, the most significant point. The hill stands in direct proximity to the church. Between them, there is not merely geographical neighborhood, but what medieval topography calls a sacred complex. A temple and a fortified elevation beside it. This is a consistent spatial formula repeated across Italy from the Etruscan period through the late Middle Ages. The elevation protects and dominates. The church consecrates and guards. Together they form a system in which what needs to be concealed can be hidden in the literal sense beneath the feet of those who pray. Leonardo depicted behind the Mona Lisa a landscape in which this hill occupies a specific position. Not the bridge, not the river, not the lake, but this elevation, pressing against the right side of the painting beyond the bridge, was the final point of the gaze. The point to which the bridge leads. The point that the woman in the painting conceals with her own body, literally sits in front of it, blocking it from the viewer. As if the artist were saying, "I will show you almost everything. I will paint the bridge. I will paint the river. I will paint the lake." But the place you actually need, there it is, behind her. Go and look for yourself. There is nothing about this hill on the internet, but the silence of the internet is not a verdict. The internet does not know most of what lies beneath Tuscan soil. Italian archaeologists are aware that unregistered sites in the region outnumber registered ones. Many of them have been waiting for their expedition for decades, some for centuries. This hill, by all appearances, has been waiting for a very long time. Long enough for a man who knew about it 500 years ago to encode its coordinates in the most famous painting in the world, and never write a single word about it. A church without a history, a hill without a name, a bridge that leads to both, a woman who sits before them and smiles. The system has closed, and yet there is no answer. This is not defeat, this is honesty. And in this case, honesty matters more than a satisfying conclusion, because a satisfying conclusion would be a lie. Nobody has excavated that hill. Nobody has conducted investigations at the foundations of the church in Casanova. Nobody has received official funding for a systematic study of the Mona Lisa landscape as a cartographic document. None of this has happened. Not yet. What we know with certainty, stated without embellishment, the bridge in the painting is real. It is the Ponte Romito in Laterina, province of Arezzo. This was established through archival reconstruction and hydrographic analysis by Italian art historian Silvano Vinceti. The landscape in the painting is oriented according to medieval cartographic tradition, south at the top. The body of water behind the Mona Lisa is the real Invaso della Penna, existing today and verifiable through any satellite service. Leonardo da Vinci personally knew this district, through regular visits to his uncle, the clergyman in Fiesole, through military cartographic work on assignment for Cesare Borgia, through topographic sketches of the Arno Valley recorded in the Códice Hammer. On the other side of the bridge, in the place called Casanova, there is a church without a documented history and a hill with a flat, bare summit without a single mention in open sources. This refers to the current state of the question. No academic institution has initiated an official field investigation of this area in the context of the Mona Lisa. Vinceti's research received wide press coverage but produced no archaeological expeditions and no systematic archival study of the Casanova parish in the holdings of the Diocese of Arezzo. This in itself is a question that requires an answer. What we hypothesize, stated with equal honesty, Leonardo encoded geographical coordinates of a specific location into the painting. He did this deliberately, with cartographic precision, using spatial tools he commanded to perfection.
That location is on the other side of the Ponte Romito. There is a church there and a hill. One or both of these objects may conceal something that Leonardo considered important to record, but not aloud, not in words, only in the one way that allowed information to be preserved without immediate risk: in paint. In the most famous painting in the world, which for 500 years hung in plain sight of everyone, and for 500 years said nothing. What exactly is concealed? Here begins the territory that a conscientious investigator has no right to fill with speculation. It may be documents, relics, archival materials withdrawn from circulation during the political upheavals of the early 16th century, and there was no shortage of such upheavals in the region. The Medici Wars, the French invasion, Republican coups, the activities of Savonarola. It may be something connected to Leonardo's personal life, a man who guarded his secrets so effectively that his intimate life, his religious views, and his political sympathies remain subjects of scholarly dispute to this day. It may be something else entirely, something we cannot hypothesize without additional data. This refers to the methodology of historical investigation. A hypothesis without field verification remains a hypothesis, regardless of how compelling its arguments may be. The next step in this investigation is not archival, but physical. Geophysical survey of the hill. Archival study of the parish records of Casanova in the holdings of the Diocese of Arezzo. Correlation of the building chronology of the church with the dating of the Mona Lisa. This is work for an expedition, not for an article. But here is what requires neither an expedition nor additional sources. The Mona Lisa is not simply a portrait. It never was simply a portrait. Leonardo da Vinci did not paint simply portraits. He was a man for whom every image was a multi-layered statement: visual, scientific, philosophical, sometimes political. Every painting he made is a layered text in which the surface meaning exists for the ordinary viewer, and the deeper meaning exists for whoever knows how to read. For 500 years, everyone read the smile. Nobody read the map. Now you know the map exists, that the bridge is real, that the place on the other side of the bridge is real, that a church stands there about which nobody knows anything, and a hill rises there that seems not to exist, and that the man who encoded all of this was, quite possibly, the most intellectually equipped human being ever to have held a brush. The Mona Lisa is smiling. She has been smiling for 500 years, and now that you know what she is looking at, that smile finally reads correctly, not as a mystery, as an invitation. The only question is, who gets there first? If you have watched this far, you already know more than 99% of the people who have ever stood in front of the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. They looked at the smile. You read the map. Stories like this one appear here regularly, not sensationalism for its own sake, but what is genuinely hidden behind the well-known, behind the official version, behind what everyone looks at and nobody sees. If you want to keep going, hit the bell. The bell specifically, not just the subscribe button. YouTube does not show new videos to all subscribers automatically, only to those who have turned on notifications. Without the bell, you simply will not know when the next one comes out. And if this breakdown was worth your time, a like under the video. Not for the number. The algorithm reads likes as a signal. This content is worth showing further. Every like is a vote for stories like this one to reach more people. See you in the next video.